I'm Saleha Ali, reporting for WORLDbytes. We're here at the YMCA George Williams College for the conference Framing Youth Work, a Human Rights Perspective. We're going to find out what some of the contributors and participants think the key issues are.
You don't have to go too far to find examples of human rights violations. You switch on the news, you go onto the internet, you open a newspaper, you're constantly presented with concerns about the human rights of groups or individuals the world over. In many ways, it provides us with a moral standpoint against the atrocious ways in which people the world over are being treated. Thus, human rights have more to offer the way we approach youth work. I want to suggest that human rights relates to youth work in two ways. I think firstly there is the idea that human rights can form a part, if not the entire focus of a piece of youth work or a project working with young people. The second link, I think, between human rights and youth work is the way in which human rights provides a kind of a well-founded, a well-reasoned kind of sort of moral framework for challenging the way in which the young people we're working with are being treated. We have an entire convention that's written for the rights of the child. What does this mean for youth work? What sort of territory are we getting into here? If you take the right of the child to association and peaceful assembly, and then you look at the Anti-Social Behaviour Act, arguably the rights of the law-abiding young people are being penalised through the excessive use of dispersal orders against law-abiding children with nowhere to go. What we see is a concern that the law in certain situations is essentially undermining the rights of the child. The issue of ASBOs, the demise of opportunities for young people to simply play, enjoy recreation, to assemble, to be kind of peaceful assembly. If youth work is to be concerned with the human rights of young people, there is a need to consider the position of the moral compass. So at one extreme we might take the view, youth work does the job of those who violate the rights of young people, or perhaps at the other extreme we say that youth work should use human rights to resist these violations in a reasoned and informed way. Maybe somewhere in between.
What I want to say today is why I think approaching things from a human rights perspective is fundamentally flawed. Now, 2 weeks ago, I visited an excellent exhibition called Taking Liberties at the British Library. This exhibition charts the whole history of political and civil rights and freedoms in Britain. When I left the exhibition, I was left more than a little bit concerned, because even before you go into the exhibition, there are some quite provocative promotional posters outside the library which say things like, in some countries you wouldn't even have the right to visit this exhibition about your rights. There's also this idea that we should be more appreciative of the British elite, the kind British elite who have over time generously granted us these rights. But I think the reality is that true and the real freedoms, which, to be fair, the exhibition does show, were not handed down to us by elites and people at the top, to whom we should be grateful to at all. They were actually seriously fought for by people like us. So the right to vote for women, for example, was bitterly fought for by suffragettes. And there's a small purse there in the exhibition which belongs to a suffragette, Emily Davison, who famously threw herself under the King's horse. Our rights, such as these, like the women's right to vote, were the result of real struggles and demands for equality. They were not cooked up by some backroom lawyers and experts. So, and in comparison, I think human rights, they don't have the same meaning and they don't have the same substance. Human rights, these rights are agreed upon and declared by states apart from us. We already know that the primary concern of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was drawn up by the Allies after the Second World War, we already know that the primary concern was not human freedom, liberty and equality. It was more about these states, the Allied forces and everything, about them distancing themselves from the horrors of the Holocaust and posturing as leaders of a better world. We know, for example, that straight after the UN Founding Conference in San Francisco, where they affirmed their commitment to peace and humanity in 1945, we know straight after this conference, the US atom bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki and, in one go vaporized 220,000 people. We know that after the Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was made in 1948, we know that the vast majority of the African continent was still under colonial rule. And we know that in the United States itself, the Jim Crow laws were still in place. And these were laws that segregated black and white citizens in the US in public places, schools, restaurants, transport, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, you might say, okay, that was the past and that's all very well, but let's talk about now. You know, you might say that maybe these freedoms are something we can maybe ask states to live up to. Maybe we can make these into a good thing, and, you know, maybe we should examine more recent clauses and so on. But, you know, I really don't think so. I think the human rights ethos is embodied by a superiority complex where we think, you know, we feel that we know what's right, and therefore it's our moral duty to save the world from itself. From the imposition of no-fly zones in Iraq in 1991, all the way through to the human rights campaigns in Somalia, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, we don't trust that these other nations and their people both can and should manage their own affairs. And despite the fact that sovereignty has been severely trumped by human rights discussions and outfits, we need to reclaim it and we need to champion it because it's a direct reflection of our aspirations and our hopes, and it is our chance to impact on what's immediately around us. And those, you know, who advocate extending human rights, you know, they might be well-intentioned, but in fact I think they're belittling us and making us incapable. You know, we should stop looking to the advocates and the experts and the lawyers and the judges, and instead I think we should have more faith in ourselves and our peers globally, and, you know, that we know what we want and that we can fight for it.
I'm from Somalia, and you may have noticed in the news that apparently we're all terrorists or pirates. What I want to talk about is what's known as the rights-based development. On the ground, what it means in developing countries is schemes which tell people how to behave and how they should treat each other. When you think about it, they're not offering jobs, they're not offering industry, they're not offering infrastructure. In fact, the right-based approach has redefined development, so that development no longer means freedom from toil and having a good life, but just surviving. You can look at things that happen in the UK. There's lots of talk in youth programs to modify people's behaviour, but never hand over the cash, or provide great jobs for 16-year-olds and so on. I myself have been in one of these programs. What tends to happen is you go there, you sit down, they talk to you, and you leave as you came, jobless. Apply it to the developing world. I would argue this approach will destroy the future of generations to come. It denies people the chance to have what we have in the West, and it treats them as little children who should be taught how to behave.
Some of us are youth workers, but some of us have been volunteering for a youth project called Refugee Youth.
It's very hard to have a job if you haven't got papers. So that's the thing that we discussed about refugees as well. If you don't have any papers, or, you know, the Home Office hasn't made any decisions on your behalf, then you haven't got any rights to work. Or even the jobs sometimes that you do have the rights and you do find these, you know, cleaning jobs and stuff like that, there's sometimes it limits to where you can get, and your motivation is down the drain.
My work is funded by the police, the Youth Justice Board. So any information that I'm gathering then goes on to the police. Now, for me to keep my job, I have to do that. Yeah, I think that is an infringement of these young people's human rights, but just to stay in a job and stay in pay, I feel like I have to do that, even though I'm against it. So, you know, what can we do to kind of, you know, stop that?
Apart from starting a revolution, challenge it. I would say.
I'd love to, but I might leave without a job if I do.
Okay, well, and again, we gotta be stand up and be counted. If what you do is driven by staying on the job, and I'm not suggesting that is your own personal situation, but if what you do is driven by staying on the job that's dictated from gathering information, and you see yourself as some form of investigator, then think seriously about either challenging it to the extent that you want to change it, or do something different.